Welcome back. Welcome back to this lecture of political science. In this lecture, we are going to see justice. Right? Justice is the most important topic in whole of the political science, whether it be in terms of marks or whether it be in terms of concept. Conceptually, state and justice remains the most two important parts of the whole of political science. So naturally the question becomes, what is justice? What is justice? Justice, as we have seen till now, justice as we have seen till now is mean fairness. Is justice equality? I am is just justice is fairness is fairly established. Is it equality? Is it equity? Is it liberty? Is it rights? Is it totalitarianism? Are these things justice? No. Justice is when all these things are there and presence of all these things feel fair. Feel fair, that is justice. Justice is not equality, justice is not liberty, justice is not right. But presence of equality, liberty and rights in a fair way, it is justice. Right? Justice as fairness, again it is a Western conception. Right? In India, Nyay is dharma. Right? In India, Nyay or justice is seen with dharma or duty. Justice as fairness is a Western view. It is not Indian view. Justice in India is closely related with dharma. Indian justice is not fairness. Indian, at least justice which is wrote by Indian scholars, Indian philosophers, and ancient Indian thinking was dharma. Today it might be different, but naturally it was dharma. It was duty. Justice, as we are going to study, is fairness. Right? Justice, as we are going to study, is fairness. What is justice? Again, question becomes very pertinent and very central to political science. What is justice? Liberals will have one view, right? Greeks had one view. Liberals have another view. Feminists have another view. Fascists have another view. Communitarians have another view, right? So justice is not a simple concept. Justice is as meta as feminism, right? Justice is not simple. Justice is not of one type. Justice is is a very complex idea. If you ask if you ask 10 persons what justice mean according to them, they will have different point of views, right? When Socrates went into Agora and asked people what is justice, Polemarchus said one thing, Thrasymachus said another thing, right? That father-son duo said another thing, Cephalus said another thing, his son or his father said another thing. Some said duty, Some said following rule of law. Some said not following rule of law, disobeying rule of law, as Thrasymachus said. Right? Some said whatever was imprinted on your soul, what your instincts say, that is justice. Socrates said that. Right? So justice is not a simple idea. Justice is quite complex idea, and justice remains the bedrock principle, the foundational principle of political science. On bedrock of justice, everything else is built on. It is architectonic idea. It is architectonic principle. What it means that it forms architecture of a discipline. Justice form architecture of the discipline. Justice is the very pillars on which building of political science is made on, whether it be political science or international relations. Right? It is very foundational idea of state. It is very foundational idea of state. So justice is a very important topic and very central to political science. If you understand justice, you will understand many of the concepts going above, and you will understand the concept we have studied before as well in a better detail, because you will have a good lens to think on. All right. What is justice? Fairness and no arbitrary discrimination. Right. Justice is presence of principles like equality, equity, liberty, rights, and totalitarianism, which feels fair, right? Which feels fair. Presence of all these concept in a society which feels fair is presence of justice. Is presence of justice, right? Justice which feels fair. On justice, there is this very famous and important quote as well by John Rawls. John Rawls is going to be the central person that we are going to study in this topic, right? John Rawls is the person that we are going to study. We are going to study his theory of justice only. We are going to get revised with Greek Greek idea of justice. We will understand Indian idea of justice when we are going to understand dharmic tradition. Right? We are going to understand dharmic tradition in Indian political thought. We are going to understand Manu and Buddhist political thought as well. Right? Right. We are going to study that justice there. We have studied Greek justice once. Modern idea of justice as given by Rawls is the agenda of this lecture. So we will open with the most famous quote of Rawls, where he says that justice is the first virtue of social systems. Justice is the first virtue of social systems. Just like truth is the first virtue of any system of thought. However attractive any system of thoughts appear, it has to be rejected if it is not based on justice. Right? However, howsoever attractive any system of thought appear, it has to be rejected if it is not based on truth. John Rawls, in his book A Theory of Justice, 1979. Right? John Rawls, in his book A Theory of Justice. A Theory of Justice. Okay. 1971. A Theory of Justice, 1971. His book in 1970. So, who was Rawls and what kind of justice? What kind of justice he talked about? Right? Justice for him is the first social virtue, is the first virtue of a social system. Right? So, what kind of justice is Rawls talking about? Justice for him is the first virtue of social system, is the most important virtue of social system. So, what kind of justice Rawls talking about? Right? There are actually two kinds of justice. Right? There are actually two types of justice. Two types of justice. First type of justice is rectifactory. Core word rectification. Second type of justice is distributive. Core word distribution. Right? Rectifactory justice is like this. I kill a person of this that a person, a family of that person, the family of that person wants rectification, legal justice of my act. They file an FIR. I, under IPC 302, go to 14 years jail. So rectification this is rectification of an act that I have done. I have I have stole I have stole, let's say, 10 gram of gold from a jewelry shop. That jewelry shop owner will file an FIR that XX person has stolen jewelry from a shop. I want that jewelry back. Police will find me, get that jewelry from me, and give it back to the jeweler. This is rectifactory justice. Rectification of a act. What is distributive justice is a different ball game. Rectifactory justice is a legal principle, right? It is legal. It is legal, and it is more about grievance redressal. Distributive justice is social, right? It is social. It is about allocation of resources. Allocation of resources. If you are going to study a type of justice in political science, what kind of justice do you think political science will study? Rectifactory or distributive? We are going to study distributive justice. Rectifactory justice, if you are going to study, you are a student of law. If you are studying political science, you are going to study distributive justice. Allocation of resources, allocation of values. On what values are we, on what values are we allocating resources that a society has? This is types of justice, right? First, we are going to understand historical historical idea of justice. There are two historical ideas of justice. First is Greek idea, second is Indian idea. Indian idea we are going to study in Indian political thought. Greek idea we have studied once. I will make a small note of that, right? In Greek idea, there are two traditions. Sophist tradition. Sophists talk about Sophists talk about what kind of justice? Sophists talk about money and power. Sophists talk about human, right? The sophists talk about merit, individualism. So people like Thrasymachus will say disobey law because whoever made law is for their own benefit, own good, right? Then Polymarchus is there, Cephalus is there, right? These people will talk about duties and dues, friends and enemies, right? And there is Gorgias as well. Gorgias talks about, I guess he talks about obligation, political obligation for in return of protection that state provides. Right. I might be wrong here, but Gorgias was the person as far as I remember. Right. Then then Socratic tradition is there. Socratic tradition starts with Socrates. What does Socrates say? Socrates say that impression of justice is imprinted on your soul. Right. Impression of justice is imprinted on your soul. Impression of justice is imprinted on your soul. Whatever your instincts say, it is justice because your soul is pure. Your soul is in kingdom of God. Then Plato came and Plato gave myth of metals, functional specialization, proper stationing, non-interference as principles of justice. Then then Aristotle came. Aristotle spoke about treating equals unequally. It is unjust. As it is unjust to treat equal unequally, it is equally unjust to treat unequals equally. Right? That is his conception of justice. Right? Equals cannot be treated unequally, and unequals cannot be treated equally as well. Another conception of justice that came out of Aristotle was his justification of slavery, which we also have to mention. So this was more or less the Greek idea of justice, right? One thing I missed was Plato in his book, Plato's Republic had subtitles concerning justice. Plato wrote his book concerning justice. So this was Greek idea of justice. Now let's start with Rawls. Indian idea of justice. Indian idea as given by Manu, Brihaspati, Kautilya, Buddha. Indian idea of justice we are going to see in Indian political thought. I will try to make a comparative account of both the ideas of justice when we are going to understand Indian political thought. Right now, let's just move on, right? And start with John Rawls. John Rawls. John Rawls and his theory of justice and his book, A Theory of Justice. His 1971 book, his Theory of Justice. Who was John Rawls? Right. Who was John Rawls? For John Rawls, for John Rawls, you see people like Bill Clinton saying things like, right? People like Bill Clinton saying things like Rawls is the greatest philosopher of 20th century, right? Rawls is the greatest philosopher of 20th century. Why? Why? Right? Why Rawls is the greatest philosopher of 21st century? Right? Why? Because he reinvented first he reinvented political science, right? And second that he gave an idea which justified affirmative action, which justified distributive justice, which justified rectification of historical injustices. Basically, he gave a complete theory which justified affirmative action across the societies. He is the first person to give theory of affirmative action, and he established that affirmative action is a reasonable choice, right? Affirmative action is a reasonable choice. It is not on it is not on emotions that one is giving affirmative action. It is not out of your own altruism you are giving affirmative action, but based on rationality. What is affirmative action? Why Rawls is greatest philosopher of 20th century? Because number one, because uh, he is the first person to give to establish affirmative action as rational choice. One more reason is that um, he revived political science, right? He revived political science. Why he had to he had to revive political science? That is a different question, right? I will solve that as well. But right now, let's just focus on he established affirmative action as rational choice. What is affirmative action? Affirmative action is basically a public policy that tries to help marginalized, right? There are two group of people, right? I will make here there are two group of people, and human development index there are two group of people. One group of people A is on 10%, other group of people is on 90% of human development, right? And this group is at 90%. Who is in more need of distribution? Which which community should be given more resources so that they can get at level of B, that both should be at near level. So it is A. Some of the resources that B has should be reallocated to B. They should be given education easily. They should be given healthcare easily. Right? This is affirmative action. Affirmative action Affirmative action is a public policy which says that communities which have been historically marginalized should be allocated more resources to the community with respect to the community who has been historically dominant. So historically marginalized communities like Dalit communities in India, then blacks in US, right? You can also see Dalit after Dalits and blacks. where there is affirmative action. Blacks again in blacks in South Africa, right? So Dalits or blacks or tribes, these are historically marginalized. They are not as powerful or rich as the the dominant communities. So Dalit blacks or tribes, what Dalit blacks or tribes should be done on is affirmative action. They should be allocated more resources that state has to get their situation better. Historically marginalized community should be treated preferentially. Their cut on the pie should be first. Their due should be given to them first. That is the idea of affirmative action. And Rawls is the first person to establish affirmative action as a rational choice. And the first person I made, the first point I made, why as to Rawls is the greatest philosopher of 21st century, is that he revived political science. He revived political science from what? Right? He revived political science from what? We are going to study behavioralism. Behavioralism is basically a movement in political science. It is a movement in political science which ignored concepts like concepts like justice, equality, liberty, state. Normative concepts they ignored, and they tried to make a proper scientific discipline out of political science. Political science is not scientific discipline, but political science is normative. It is based on norms. It is a normative discipline. Behavioralists ignored norms. As they ignored norms, decline of political science started. Decline of political science started. What is decline of political science? We are going to study in behavioralism, but decline of political science started. When Rawls came, he went back to understanding state, justice, all these things, and from Rawls, political science decline stopped. And after Rawls, people like Amartya Sen, people like Dworkin, people like Nozick, right? People like Karl Vasak, people like Iris Marian Young, all these people talked about normative issues and application of normative issues in real life, and after that political science become relevant again. So that is why Rawls is the greatest philosopher of 21st century. First, he revived political science. Second, he established affirmative action as a rational choice. So, right, this was the importance of Rawls, right? But we also have to understand the time and space of Rawls as well. Why time and space? Because it will make us understand in what kind of situation did Rawls wrote his theory. Why did he had to write his theory? Why did he have to write his theory? Right? Why did he have to write his theory? What is time and space of Rawls? Time was 1960s and 70s USA. Right? Space was USA. Time was 1970s, 1960s, and USA. What is so peculiar with 1960s and 1970s is that social unrest was there, right? US state was facing legitimation crisis. Social unrest was there. US state was facing legitimation crisis, and and women, blacks, were protesting, Koreans were protesting, right? And Vietnam War was also going on parallelly. Vietnam War is a very peculiar situation, is a very niche situation where America attacked Vietnam because Soviet influence on Vietnam was increasing. Because of Soviet influence on Vietnam was increasing, America sent a lot of people to Vietnam. Now, what is the issue with going to Vietnam? American public felt that this is not our war. We have nothing to do this war, and US is unnecessary. US government is unnecessarily sending young kids to Vietnam. They are coming back with one leg, two leg off. They are coming back dead. So, so there was a lot of social unrest. Blacks were the major conflicts, conscripts. Blacks were the major conscripts of Vietnam War. Because of black men, because of black men going to Vietnam in a lot of numbers, people like Martin Luther King, people like Malcolm X started Black Panther movement. Black Panther movement was a violent movement that shook up the whole USA. Right? They conducted killings. They were a very violent movement, and they tried to intimidate the people, the white supremacists, and all those people, so that so that there will be a sense of fear within white, and they will not poke fingers in black's life. So this was a very complex situation where women were protesting for their rights, blacks were protesting for their rights, Vietnam War was going on, and social unrest was there, legitimation crisis was there, people were getting violent. You see Koreans and blacks fighting, right? All this situation was going at all at once. In this situation, Rawls gave his theory of justice, and in this situation Rawls wrote, justice is the first virtue of social systems. Liberty, equality, everything else won't be considered legitimate unless they appeared just, and that is why justice is the most important virtue. Justice is architectonic. Justice is the first virtue. This was his context, and that is why he wrote his theory of justice, because he considered justice to be the principle on which rest of the principle lie on. Justice, liberty, equality. Liberty, equality state everything else is based on they appearing just. That is why he wrote this theory, and that is why he wrote this theory. In this, and going ahead, we have to understand his theory of justice. But before understanding his theory of justice, we have to understand two or more, two, three more things, right? Two, three more things, like what influenced him, right? What influenced him? What kind of theory his theory is? What kind of theory his theory is, and how he wrote his theory, and because of whose influence he wrote his theory, what words are there, what is the meaning of those words. All this we have to understand first, and then we'll start with his theory of justice, right? So we have to understand the characteristics slash features slash influence on Rawls, right? What kind of theory Rawlsian theory is? What kind of theory Rawlsian theory is? It is a it is a theory of distributive justice. It is a theory of distributive justice. What distributive justice we have studied first, right? We have studied Bentham's greatest happiness of greatest number. This is the first distributive justice uh, theory we have studied, right? This is the first. What what Giagian as a theory is, right? What Giagian as a theory is. Giagian as a theory talks about greatest happiness of greatest number. What does it mean? It means that state should go for such public policy, such distributive policy, which will which will cater to greatest happiness first and greatest number then. Right? When we understood Giagian, I explained if I have 1,01,000 rupees, 1,01,000 rupees. If I distribute them like 1 lakh and 1,000, and if I distribute them 10,000 and time 100, it means the same thing for Bentham, right? Because net happiness in both the systems is equal. The distribution does not matter to the Bentham as long as net happiness of the system remains the same, right? And this was an utilitarian system. This was an utilitarian principle in which, as long as net happiness of a system net happiness of a system is net happiness of system remains the same, it does not matter to Rawls which kind of which kind of uh, distribution there is, as long as net happiness is there. Even if dignity of some people is getting dignity of some people is not being there, it does not matter to Rawls, right? It does not matter to Bentham, it matters to Rawls, right? Against Bentham's idea of Giagian, Rawls revives Kant's Kant's deontology. He revives Kant's deontology. For Bentham, what matters more, values or consequences? Consequences. For Kant, what matters more is means, values, or some categorical imperatives. For Kant, the most important categorical imperative is dignity. Right? Is dignity. For Kant, for Kant, values are not context values are not context applicable. Right? For him, values don't change according to context. He does not subscribe to value relativism. He does not subscribe to value relativism, which means that according to the context, you are changing your values. This is something. This is something which Rawls does not. Kant does not agree with, right? Value relativism is not something which Kant agree with. So for Kant, dignity is an absolute principle. In every situation, in every kind of public policy, dignity should be upheld, right? Dignity should be upheld. As dignity should be upheld, the kind of the kind of the kind of theory which Rawls will write will have dignity as core principle. The foundational value, dignity as core principle. The foundational value on which Rawls theory of justice is based on dignity, for which Rawls says that justice as fairness is based on the inviolability of human dignity. So dignity is the foundational principle of Rawls' theory of justice, for which he says that justice as fairness is the is based on principle of inviolability of human dignity. And he goes on to say that for dignity of few, the dignity of few cannot be compromised for greater good of many. Dignity of few cannot be compromised for greater good of many. Right? If and he goes on to say that dignity of few cannot be compromised for good for greater good of many. What does this mean? What does this mean? Right? What does this mean? आवाज नहीं आ रहा मेरा? 41. Okay, no issues. Okay. So justice as fairness is based on principle of inviolability of human dignity. Dignity of few cannot be compromised for greater good of many. Right? What this statement does is this, that it established that human dignity is the basic principle on which Rawls' theory of justice is based on. The second statement, that dignity of few cannot be compromised for greater good of many, this statement justifies, and this statement criticizes, number one, this statement criticizes Bentham's utilitarianism. Right? The second thing it criticizes is neoliberal state or rolling back of state, that state will be limited to law and order. State won't do welfare functions. This is the criticism of that. Right? Then the first we have established it is a theory of distributive justice. It is a theory of distributive justice based on deontology. Right? Which deontological principle it is based on? Human dignity. For which he says that justice as fairness is based on principle of inviolability of human dignity. Then the second thing that Rawls' theory of justice is based on or takes influence from is concept of moral judgment. concept of moral judgment. What is concept of moral judgment? Right. What is concept of moral judgment? This is the concept of intuitionism as explained by Kant. What is intuitionism? If you remember Socrates, if you remember Socrates, what does Socrates say? The impression of justice is imprinted on our soul. Whatever if you feel just, and whatever soul says you is right to do is the justice. Man by nature is ethical. His soul belongs to kingdom of God. This is the idea of moral judgment. That impression of justice is imprinted on your soul. ठीक है? Impression of justice is imprinted on your soul. This idea of Socrates was later codified or explained by Kant as intuitionism. Right? Intuitionism. Intuitionism is basically the idea that our soul knows what is right, right? But we act, we act not according to our soul because social situations, social context subdue voice of the soul, right? You know by heart what is right to do, what is right? But you don't act according to it because because social situations subdue your soul. If you remember Rousseau and his idea of real will and actual will, this is the exact idea of intuitionism. What is real will? Whatever our soul tells us to do is real will. What we do with that by applying reason is actual will. This is the idea behind intuitionism. Real will is implemented on our soul, imprinted on our soul. Actual will is what we do by applying our reason. By applying our reason. For which, for for which Rawls, this is intuitionism. The idea that we know what is right, but we don't know, we don't do according to that voice that is coming out of your soul. For this situation, Rawls give his concept of reflexive equilibrium. Reflexive equilibrium. What is reflexive equilibrium? This is basically the concept that says that this is the concept which says that we should show behavioral consistency towards voice of our soul, right? Whatever intuition says, what is reflexive equilibrium? It basically wants to sync, it basically wants to sync whatever soul says and whatever action we take, right? action, and voice of soul. Reflexive equilibrium wants to sync these two things, voice of soul and action. Reflexive equilibrium wants to sync those things, these two things, right? This is the idea of intuitionism. Intuitionism is very much like real will and actual will. Reflexive equilibrium basically says that we should do as our soul says, right? This is the second feature, that it is based on concept of moral judgment and reflexive equilibrium. The third thing that 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 Rawls is influenced by, or Rawls theory of justice shows it to be a feature of, it is social contract. Rawls theory of justice is a social contract. It is a contract of all with all. Okay, it is a social contract. This is the third feature. Then who would be who would be the influences, as we have gone through the features of his theory? Who would be the influences? Social contract scholars like Locke, Hobbes are the influences. Rousseau is also influenced because he has a social contract of his own, right? These are influences. Then Kant is an influence because he takes his view of intuitionism. Rousseau is again an influence because he takes his view of real will, actual will. Then Bentham is an influence in a sense that he criticizes him. Socrates is an influence because he he takes his view on soul, justice, all those things, right? All these people are influences on him. From the next lecture, we'll start with we'll start with the original idea as given by Rawls, and we'll start with the actual social contract as given by Rawls, whereby we'll try to understand his idea of human nature, his idea of state of nature, his process of contract, his terms and condition of contract, and his outcome of contract. Basically, the 5 steps of social contract scholars. Human nature, for Rawls it is conscience. State of nature for Rawls is original position. Process of contract for him is veil of ignorance, maximin principle, right? And outcome of contract is going to be the principle of difference, the principle of maximum equal liberty, and outcome is going to be greatest uh, greatest advantage to least advantage, right? Then we are going to understand his concepts in quite a detail. I'll try to give as many examples as possible. I'll try to uh, explain his very philosophical concepts in very easy manner. I hope this helped. I will start with his social contract and his the actual theory of justice in his book A Theory of Justice of 1971. Thank you so much. Bye bye. See you.